Welcome to Mentera, where together with you, we're building a new era of mental health. We're so glad that you've joined us for our first virtual event, the Impact of DEI on Mental Health. My name is Wilfried Kren, and as a mental health professional and leader here at Mentera, these are two issues that I'm passionate about, and I know you are too. Of the HR and business leaders we've talked to, these two issues are at the top list of initiatives that they are trying to implement. That's because DEI and mental health impact every part of the employee journey, from talent acquisition to building amazing cultures, and even our financial and legal decision making. That's why we brought together an amazing group of thought leaders to share their experiences and journeys at the intersection of DEI and mental health. We have a use case featuring Cornell Verdeja Woodson of Headspace Health, sharing how they're thinking about building DEI and mental health into their culture and product. We're putting data into action with Bob Raleigh of PathSite Predictive Science, sharing how you move your employees from division to common ground. And finally, Natasha Bowman of the Bowman Foundation shares her inspiring story of a life lived at the intersection of DEI and mental health. Finally, we want to share your questions. So please use the Q&A function, and we'll be bringing our speakers back at the end for a special Mentera moment for a deep dive into the intersection of DEI and mental health. So to begin, I want to introduce Cornell Verdeja Woodson of Headspace Health. As Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging at Headspace, he's worked to drive change to address the inequities in our society and organizations that impact historically excluded groups and ultimately their mental health. I've asked him to share with us how Headspace is thinking about DEI and mental health within their own company, as well as building it into their products. Thank you, Cornell, again for joining us today. I'm just so excited to have you as part of our inaugural virtual event, the Impact of DEI on Mental Health. And I think that getting to know you and getting to hear your perspective has brought so much insight for me. And I want to tell you like how I first got the impetus to reach out to you. Because I have friends at both Ginger and Headspace, and they were able to connect me because I had an opportunity to read two different reports that came out in 2021. First, the State of Employee Mental Health that came out from Headspace Health. And then the second one is the HR Leader's Guide to Making Mental Health Part of Your DEI Strategy. And it's a little bit embarrassing for me to say because I'm passionate about these two different issues, but I hadn't before made the connection in that way of how integral both DEI and mental health are to each other. And when we have in our companies these two different strategies going on, these two different initiatives going on, if we're not making them work together, I think we're really losing out on a lot of really fantastic work that can happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I love this topic. And I think you're not alone in not making the connection between these two things, because we tend to silo issues in very different buckets rather than seeing how they are a system and how they're all intertwined and have an impact on each other. So you're not alone, and together we're going to figure it out, and we're going to solve this issue for many employees who are hurting right now and looking for support that will help them be able to navigate and not just survive, but thrive in the world.
That's great. And I think you're right. It's something that we're doing together. And that's the magic of how doing it in a really open and honest way allows people to work together and come together to make these kind of big changes that we're trying to make, and they are big changes.
Yeah.
Speaking of changes,
Uh-huh.
you've had such an interesting career, and just to get started, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you moved from working in DEI in academia to now working in tech.
Yeah. I actually started my career as a 9th through 12th grade English teacher in Atlanta, Georgia, actually. And that was the first time diversity, equity, and inclusion became a part of what I did for a living. I started with professional development workshops for my fellow teachers about building belonging in the classroom for students and their unique needs. We worked in underserved communities, and so really understanding what our students needed and how the classroom could be a safe haven for them in order to really learn and really get some amazing work done. So that was where I really got the bug to start DEIB and understanding it and really diving into the literature. And then I went and got a master's in higher education, and the emphasis of that program was social justice. And so I really started reading Audre Lorde and you know, Bell Hooks and all the greats, right, around understanding how social issues and issues of racism and sexism and all the isms and sort of the systemic discrimination really impact our lives. And then worked at NYU and Cornell University, and really helping, working with students, but also we're helping faculty and staff understand how we embed DEIB into what we do, and then made that switch over into tech. And one of the reasons why is I just felt like the tech industry, while deals with some of the same issues that higher ed does or academia does, was really putting more effort, in my opinion, into the work of understanding inequality, and really putting in the resources for us to really begin to try some things and do some things in order to remedy some of these generational issues that we've been experiencing for quite some time. And so the energy was there, and I had the energy, and I said, it's time for me to make a pivot. I want to get in on that excitement of changing the world. Not to mention that a lot of these tech companies are impacting the way we live our lives. When you think about 15, 20 years ago, we weren't allowing people into our homes while we were away on vacation through Airbnb, right? We weren't putting our lives up on Instagram and Facebook. And so these tech companies literally changed the way we navigate the world. I thought, if we could get these companies to understand diversity, equity, and inclusion, imagine how else we could change the world through their influence.
Absolutely right. And not only are we allowing both people into our homes and putting ourselves out on our screens, tech has become so immersive,
Right.
I think, that we are really allowing it into our minds,
Yeah.
right? To shape who we are and who we're becoming. And if it doesn't have that sort of positive perspective, especially on diversity and mental health for that matter,
Right.
we're going to be shaped by those environments that we're in.
That's right.
So I know one of the things that I've seen is that tech companies, you know, Headspace Health specifically, have been really promoting diversity efforts.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's such a great thing to see these companies take leadership in this area, because they are new. A lot of them are, and have the ability to, you know, be what we think tech companies are: agile and progressive, and they have the ability to really do that because some of them don't have the long history that other companies have, and kind of the challenges of steering that ship.
Right.
But I also know that some companies, while they may talk a good game about their diversity efforts and wanting to do great things in the world, sometimes it's really harder for that to happen in action. And I'm curious to hear, you know, you don't have to make anybody feel bad, but
Right.
what have you been some of your experiences in coming against some of the challenges that have been there in order to make these changes?
Absolutely. I think you hit on something that's really, really important and something I've been talking about for a number of years now, that there is a difference between awareness, there's a difference between an appreciation and an understanding of why diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is important, and actually doing something about it. And what I find, and with many clients I've worked with many organizations I've worked for, that when you get in and start doing the work, there's this disconnect of like, wait, I know we said we wanted to do this, and this is the kind of this utopia that we're trying to create, but I didn't know we had to do that in order to get there. It's like, yeah, we've got to change the way we do things. We got to resituate systems and processes and ways of thinking in order to reach that vision that we all agreed that we wanted to get to. So there is a disconnect between what we want to be and how we actually, what we have to do and actually to get there, which to me is one of the biggest barriers. I liken it to, I want to lose weight, right? There's some, I'm not in the best of shape. And so I'm trying to get back into the gym. I hired a trainer. I want to do it. I know I need to do it, but the action it takes to get there, I'm like, oh, I don't know that I can do that, right? I got to change my eating habits, but I love ice cream, right? I know I need to do these things to get to that vision that I'm looking for, but when it actually comes time to do it, I make up all the excuses as to why. And I think that's exactly the same way that we're seeing within organizations across different industries. There is a complete disconnect. And I do believe that there are many people, many leaders who in theory believe in the vision that we keep talking about, but when it comes time to do certain things, because it requires us to relinquish privilege, to relinquish power in order to make it happen, that's where we really get into a lot of trouble, because people fear that and what that means, right? And what change looks like. So I think that's a big barrier to our true success in making advancement in this area.
Yeah, I can really see that. And I'm curious because what we're talking about today is really that intersection between and those parallels between DEI and mental health.
Right.
Do you see some of the same challenges in sort of changing people's minds or getting people on board for mental health as well?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. I think that the barrier around mental health alone is that the organization, like DEI, doesn't understand its role in the issue, right? So many organizations, many leaders are of the mind that their job isn't to be social justice warriors. Their job is to make business, right? And so they lack the understanding of how DEIB intersects with that work as stewards, as people within the society, as organizations situated in a community, right, where we oftentimes displace people with the building of our buildings and making housing expensive, right? There's a DEIB issue or DEIB intersection with how we do business. And I think it's the same thing with mental health, understanding that we want people's personal lives to be so outside of the workplace that we don't understand that those things don't leave or sit at the door when we come into the building or come into the virtual Zoom room, right? And so I think workplaces are trying to understand what is our locus of control and where does our line end of where our responsibility is to support mental health. Is it just benefits? Is it just providing really good healthcare so people have access to therapists and coaches and things of that sort? And so I think that's the struggle that I've seen, is how far do I go as an employer in being involved in the mental health of my employees? And I think the conversation that we've seen is that the mental health issues aren't just happening, or the impetus for the mental health concerns isn't just happening outside the workplace, it's happening in the workplace, right? As a Black queer man, I'm not just dealing with racism and homophobia outside of the workplace, I also deal with it in-house as well. So the workplace is a part of the situation and therefore has much more, or needs to have much more involvement in how we impact the mental health of the people who work for us.
Exactly. And it speaks to the fact that work has become so integrated in our lives, especially as so many people have transferred to working from home.
For sure.
Those boundaries aren't very clear. And I think, especially for us who have come out of this millennial generation, where we want our work to be meaningful.
Right.
We want to be passionate about what we do. And so our work does really become part of our identity, that it becomes even more important to have those things taken care of
That's right.
in that place,
Yeah.
in our workplace, as well as our home life.
In the room to be able to have that balance. Right?
Yeah.
Create the situation where if I need to go run an errand, go to the eye doctor, take care of my health, go to the gym, go for a walk, that I work for a culture that allows me that space to actually do that. And to be honest, I really think that we've always had work integrated into our personal lives, even before the pandemic, right? It's just now been brought to light more. People were working, we spend more time at work with our colleagues than we do in our own homes with our families. That's always been the case, right? Now we're home more because we're not commuting and actually physically leaving our spaces, but work has always been a major part of our lives. Now we're really understanding it, and people are like, whoa, wait a minute. This is really, there's a major imbalance here between how much time I spend on the job, how much I earn, right, in my career advancement, and the quality of life that I'm living. And I think people are really starting to figure out, no, that's not what I want anymore. And that's what's making this such a big topic, in my opinion, but it's always been there.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think too, it's been like that awareness of that very issue is a big reason why there's been so much push from younger generations to really make these changes.
That's right.
And in a lot of places, these younger generations that are coming into the workforce are big drivers of change organizationally, even though they may not have, the power of being an executive or being in senior leadership. So it is really fascinating and also great to see.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of changes in the workplace, Headspace Health is a merger between Headspace, a meditation technology company, and Ginger, which is a therapy, pure mental health company. And you started right before that merger happened, correct?
Yeah, like many months before, actually. Yeah.
And I was really excited to see this because both Headspace and Ginger are two of my favorite companies out there. So it was really great to see. It's like when your friends get married or something.
Right. I love that.
But I know that like both companies, one had a passion for diversity and inclusion. Two had a really strong passion for mental health and wanting to make changes of how we approach our mental health and how we treat our mental health, and really strong teams. And I'm curious to hear from your perspective what it's been like to bring those two companies together, those two teams together, because on the one hand, you have a lot of alignment, but on the other hand, whenever you do that, there's going to be challenges. There's going to be things that come up that make those kinds of changes difficult.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think anyone, listening or watching this will understand, who have been through an acquisition or a merger, understand how difficult it is to bring two companies together, because you have different systems, you have different processes, you have different ways of going about the work that require you to really sit down, listen to each other, and understand where each side is coming from in order to bring together into one entity. So one of the biggest challenges was like you had strong identity on both sides, and neither identity really wanted to lose itself in creating this new organization. And so we had to really take, in my opinion, from a DI perspective, take pieces of both sides of this merger to say, how do we come together to make this new thing that is representative of who both organizations are, right? Or were. And so there's lots of conversation and dialogue and active listening, which can be a challenge in a space where you constantly want to move, but really taking the time to go, no, we want to make sure we're doing this right and that we're listening to our people and listening to, even our customers around, how, what their needs are, and infusing that into the new identity, which is Headspace Health. And then also recognizing that whatever DEIB work we do needs to ladder up to the overall business strategy, because it needs to be embedded into the business strategy. So allowing our C-suite leaders to do their work and to really create the vision and the values around how we do what we do. And then taking that work and understanding, okay, so how do we lay over DEIB into every area of this in order to really make sure that it is woven throughout and not just something that is happening tangentially or parallel to the business strategy, but really embedded into it. So figuring all that out and wanting to move was a big challenge, at least for me. I'm a little impatient. And so I like to go, let's go. But really having to step back and go, no, we've got to make sure we're doing this right, and make sure that we have everything in place to be able to do it right. So some of the more tactical things that were challenges were just merging of our systems, right? You have employees in one database, employees in another database. In order for me to understand what our workforce looks like and where we really have some areas of opportunity, that data was critical. And so getting to a point where it was all together was definitely a big challenge, but we've overcome it. We have a great team of people that I work with, and really helping to bring Headspace Health to life as one big entity.
Fantastic. And it's really great to hear, because when you're going through changes like that, it's easy for some things to get lost,
right?
Especially if people aren't driving to continue them. And I think one of those can be, a DEI initiative, or a focus in a certain area. And what I've really loved, and hopefully it won't embarrass you, because we have Headspace through my company, through Mentera, and you have a really fantastic video on the app right now. You just really enjoyed it. And of course, getting to see your face on the screen is really fantastic too. But I was really pleased to see how Headspace Health is continuing this focus on integrating DEI and mental health. And I'd love to hear a little bit about how you're really thinking about building it into the product and bringing it into people's lives in that way.
Absolutely. I think one of the major things is representation, right? We know that when it comes to finding a therapist, when it comes to finding a coach, when it comes to really consuming media in general, people are craving representation, seeing themselves, because it helps them feel like the person that they're working with or listening to understands their unique experiences, right? And so we're paying close attention to the diversity of our therapists, diversity of our coaches, and the diversity of our meditation teachers, and really looking at how we build in that diversity, and also reaching the people who we're currently not reaching through meditation, right? And recognizing that there are different cultural barriers that prevent groups from accessing and talking about mental health first and foremost. So having someone who looks like them, who is representative of who they are, is one of the steps in helping to develop authentic relationships with the communities that we want to serve, and continued representation of the communities that we currently serve. And so that's really, really important for us. And I think the other thing is just the quality of care as well, and really having a conversation around making sure that our therapists and our coaches are experienced and educated in being able to support various populations like LGBTQ individuals, trans individuals, people with disabilities, people at different stages of their life, and understanding that, right? So having those resources there makes sure that we can meet people where they are and meet people through their very unique situations and help provide the best quality services that we possibly can. So we're very human-centered. That's the phrase that we talk about all the time, like a human-centered approach to everything that we do. And we also try and do that internally as well. So looking at our engagement surveys, looking at how our employees are being impacted by the work and through the business so that they can show up in their best way. So we've implemented various things for our employees to make sure that we're also taking care of them as well. And we're always in conversation around what else that might look like in order to really show up for them as they show up for our customers.
It's fantastic. And what I think what representation does, as you said, is it really builds trust
Yeah.
with different communities, especially in those places where maybe you're trying to bring something new and bring people into an area that they may not have experienced before. That trust is so important to like building that connection and helping people to feel safe and comfortable in inhabiting a new space.
That's right. Yeah. Having that representation and then having the content to back it up, right? Because the representation is one thing, but okay, if I see another Black man or a Black woman or a Latina woman or Asian person, right? Like, okay, that gets me to come into the app and go, wow, there's someone there who looks like me. But then the content also has to exist that represents my unique situations as well. And so we're also thinking through what is that content that will also speak to those experiences too.
Yeah. But that can be hard, you know? It's one thing to say this is what we want, but when it comes to the reality of sourcing talent and finding the right people, how do you guys go about making sure that those maybe goals in terms of bringing in diverse viewpoints and bringing in diverse talent match up with what actually happens?
Yeah. So I think for us, it's about, and I think with any organization, it really has to be about understanding where we are right now, right? And so that data, going back to that data, where are we currently? And then what are the systems and the culture pieces, the processes that might be barriers to us having a more diverse workforce, right? Or more diverse representation in the app, right? What are the systemic reasons that might exist that prevent us from advancing in that way? Without an understanding of that and a willingness to do things differently, we'll never achieve the level of diversity that we're trying to achieve. And I think that's one of the barriers that many organizations struggle with is like, in theory, yes, diversity is amazing. We want it, absolutely. But when it comes down to looking at the real nitty gritty of like, okay, so where are we now? How did we get here, right? What were the systems and the decisions and the attitudes and the cultures that got us here? And then what are those same things that are preventing us from getting where we actually said we just want to be? And that's super, super critical. And so we're looking at, for example, from our talent acquisition standpoint, what are the partners that we need to have, right? What are the actual steps and the systems that are currently in place that we got to go, yeah, that needs to be switched out. So we're training our managers and we're getting ready to launch an inclusive hiring training about what does that look like? And then there's accountability. How do we hold managers accountable to actually following that process? And so we have a vice president for talent acquisition who's all about holding people accountable and really doing the hard work of saying, no, we cannot move forward with that process because look at your pipeline. Look at, how are we reaching out to the communities that we know your team lacks in order to make sure that we're creating an equitable opportunity for folks from different backgrounds to be able to join our team, right? So being willing to say, nope, we can't move forward until this is right. That is a hard decision to make. And that's how we are really putting our flag in the sand and say, this matters to us. And we're willing to pause in order to get there.
That is so helpful because I know that is a challenge that so many people, even if your heart is in the right place, right? Actually putting it to paper and putting it into action is much harder, and having those real strategies. So I'm definitely going to come back to you and get some of those resources that you guys
good, very good.
and see if I could share them.
Yeah.
This was really fantastic. I've so enjoyed getting to hear more of your perspective and getting to hear all of the really great things that Headspace Health is doing at this intersection of I think, two of the most important issues of our time,
That's right.
which is hard to say because there's so many,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
many important issues. So um, I will say thank you. I really appreciated this and look forward to hearing more from you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Cornell.
Thank you.
Next, I want to turn things over to one of Mentera's advisors, Dennis Robbins, for his conversation with Dr. Bob Raleigh. Bob is a managing partner at PathSite Predictive Science, where he's focused on understanding and influencing the human interface on today's complex, globally connected human network. Through training leaders in the workforce, Bob has worked to move past division and to help executives bring and build supportive cultures based on common understanding.
Good morning, Bob. Good to see you.
Back at you.
I'm really delighted that we have the opportunity to talk about thinking about DEI in a bit of a different way. It's been around for a long time, and we really would like to give some different dimensions to the whole field in the way in which we look at people and the way we look at cultures. Let me start off by asking you, Bob, what do you think the biggest challenge that we really face in the whole DEI space today is?
Well, you know, it's been, as you said, around forever. And we even go back to the point of the only thing we had to differentiate people was the difference between your logic and your emotions and things like that. But we've come a long way. And I think if I had to pick one element of DEI for today, it's moving on beyond the notion of differences and trying to find a way to get people back into the notion of we instead of me. So if I had to pick one, that would be the challenge that is before us today.
So you're suggesting that it's important that while we want to be sensitive to culture, including that in terms of the way in which we interact with folks and appreciate that, we don't want to dilute or distill the person into that process where we lose that individual person, because white people and Black and brown people and Asian people, they may think the same, even though there's a big cultural foundational difference. How would you approach that?
I think you're right, and it kind of leads us from looking at demographics and behavior as the go-to medium of how people see themselves, and we've done a pretty good job of understanding those differences. But you're right, the lived life is really a critical component to where we go from here. You know, we start to look at science as a be all and end all. And you don't have to go back very far when we started to use science of intelligence as a race-based point of view or to determine it. And we don't want to go back to that, but we do want to be able to understand our personal point of view and be really comfortable in those personal points of view. But we've got to move on to embracing a concept where we can look beyond our physical determinants of who we are and move to the concept of cognition and how we think about things.
So how we think about things and the images and the words and the themes that we use have a dramatic impact in terms of the way in which we see the world. So one of the things that has become very, very interesting to me, and we've discussed this in the past, has been there are people that think differently than I do. And they don't have to think the same as I do, but I want to at least be able to understand where they're coming from. And as far back as the Stone Age, we've reached across tribes to be able to not only understand differences, but to benefit from those differences, to have a more comprehensive view and a comprehensive ability to get things done. How would you express it? Actually, you have a typology you've created in terms of these different types of folks that we distinguish people by their intuition. In fact, you've indicated in the past from Tversky and Kahneman's work that 95% of the decisions that we make are basically kind of like, yeah, that sounds about right. They're not really deep-seated, thought-through intellectual exercises. So how do we get beyond that 95% of heuristics to a more thoughtful, cognitive-based approach? Because just transmitting knowledge isn't going to get it.
Right. Well, it's interesting that you bring those up. We've added, in fact, we've embedded our model of why people do what they do and think what they think. It comes from the work of Jonathan Haidt and his colleagues in the moral foundations theory. And what they found is that, like Kahneman and Tversky, so much of our thinking is intuitive in nature. So when we get into a new situation, we get to a different job, or we're in a different social situation, we make these decisions very rapidly. And what we found was that the opportunity to look at our 5 foundational instincts from the Stone Age in particular, we know that how we filter the impact of these instincts really feeds into our shortcuts for our cognition, and that's where the intuition comes from. So what we found that the idea for our instincts for care and fairness are 2 powerful instincts that come to fruition when we're starting to look for our cognitive similarities. On the other side, we've got loyalty and authority and purity as the way we group 2 different polarities of our instinctual profiles. Now, these are really, really powerful things, and they do a lot of organizing our intuitions to say, like you said, that looks about right, is what we give a lot of our really critical decisions that we make about why we like people, why we don't like people, why we intuitive our decision making. So we've incorporated that into our model of why, and it goes a long way towards acknowledging differences, but giving us a way to move forward.
So Bob, why do people feel, today we have so much contentiousness and pointing fingers at the other and shame and blame and so on and so forth. How do we reconcile these differences? What kind of things can we do? Is there some kind of a clean way to ask questions or to set forth a value formulation where we can get buy-in from larger numbers and not find reasons to demonize the other?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So a lot of social emotional learning has a premise that you start with self-examination, and we do that. So we offer the idea that lived life is really a critical starting point. But what that allows us to do when we understand the impact of our instincts is it gives us a way to celebrate the equity that we have for ourselves and the genuineness of our point of view. But a very interesting thing happens along the way. By allowing us to celebrate that, we also have to understand that there are other people who are equally genuine and equally intuitive for their point of view. And guess what? It's not the same. So that forces us to give space to both sides of the coin. We have to understand our equity, but we have to understand their equity too. And that's the first step towards getting to a higher concept of moving back to a more perfect union.
So you think we can have a more perfect union? It's not elusive, it's not evasive.
No, it's not, because once we understand that an individualist, for example, one pole of our point of view, really thinks about and is swayed by care and fairness, right? So they're the ones that look for the impact of the world on the individual. And so they're driven by care and fairness and justice and empathy and reliability and so on. Well, the other side is driven by those other instincts of loyalty, authority, and purity. And what happens there is they're driven by respect and patriotism, self-sacrifice and cleanliness. And they tend to be, irreconcilable in their points of difference. Well, if we're trying to get people to give up their instinctual point of view, that's a losing cause. We can't do that. But what we have to do is create a space like in our evolutionary past. The successful cultures all took people from both spectrums to create a heterogeneous cultural awareness. And those that were built on the social binding strengths and the individualist strengths together were the ones that really survived.
Yeah, so interesting. So, it's also interesting to me that people today gravitate towards people that think like they do. They hire people that think like they do. So when you speak of those that are concerned by care and fairness, the individualist, or when you speak of your social binder with loyalty and purity and cleanliness and the like, it seems to me that the social binder is really driven by things like, hey, father knows best. You don't always know what father is going to do, but he's out there to take care of you and watch out for you. He's going to watch your back. And we got to be concerned about those other people because they may sabotage our position. And we don't want our position to be sabotaged. So we'll reformulate knowledge of the facts, and we want to protect and maintain the status quo. Yet there has to be some kind of a middle ground where we can meet and work together for, again, what you said earlier, for this more perfect union. So how do we do that, Bob? What can we do to address that?
Well, if we're using this model to do two things. One, celebrate the self and all the virtues there, being aware of the others and not contaminate them with vitriol. We've got to have that openness of understanding that their point of view is genuine and authentic.
But how can we make them feel safe, and how can we give them the protective values they need to be themselves without feeling they're going to be stomped on?
And you've gotten into the topic that I think is sacrosanct for our work, and that is we've got to acknowledge everybody has a certain level of need, and going beyond that, the issue of psychological safety is really critical. I bet it's 75% of the work we do is working with companies to allow people to be their authentic self and have safe places to air their grievances.
Sure.
And know that each other has a real legitimate point of view. But what happens is a lot of times in the DEI training, we end up seeing will put out a flyer saying, we're interested in people who are looking to work on the idea of inclusivity. Well, to be honest with you, the intuition of people who are interested in inclusivity really calls out the individualists and all the people that would be interested in those topics. So what we find is so many of the training that we've done is really preaching to the choir. So we've got to, again, have self-awareness and saying, now we're doing research, and our data model forces companies to look across all the spectrums of our worldviews and make sure that we can preach to the choir of our individualists, but they have to have a network intervention to give them the opportunity to have conversations around their culture with social binders and the centrists that perhaps don't share the intuitive interest in inclusivity.
So Bob, you talked frequently about using clean questions and how we can use the best of data science and neuroscience to be able to address these kinds of issues, and that it's critical that we do so. You've put together a manner in which you can look at large populations of people, or even small, but large populations in companies to determine the spectrum of people that comprise those companies, the social binders and the individualists and the centrists and the like. How do you do that exactly, and how complex is that?
Well, it's really interesting. There's we actually created an inclusive workforce inventory, where we have gone into government departments and large corporations and are able to identify people in different departments and job titles naturally gravitate to our instinctual patterns. So once we identify them, then we can have a really structured relationship by saying, you know, folks over here in one department are really interested in this inclusivity idea. Folks over here are waiting to see if that is the way our culture is going to be organized. They'll come along, but they won't be first. So we're able to understand that. And likewise, you mentioned clean questions. That has a rich history of development in psychotherapy, but it allows us to look to each other. And when we were understanding and the anxiety in our brains are using that this could be an uncomfortable conversation, clean questions is a great way to move beyond that discomfort and diffuse it with non evaluative conversations. And there's a lot of work that we do on that, which, by the way, is predicated on the notion of psychological safety.
What role does leadership, Bob, play in this process? And can you talk a bit about leadership by ethnicity in organizations?
Well, the nice thing about it is, and I want to stress, when we talk about a individualist or social binder or centrist personality, these are groupings of people who see the world across age, gender, and ethnicity. It is not, they're not predictive of any race, gender, or profile. So it's a wonderful way to see other people beyond your life, lived life experience in a way that lets you create allyships and understanding that these people share your point of view. And it's not simply because of the way you look or the age or your gender. So those are really important concepts to embed in this. So leadership have to, on the one hand, give people the opportunity to, in the space in their day-to-day jobs, to explore these types of issues, and in fact they have to travel the same route as everyone else. Of leadership has to understand their own biases, their own points of shortcomings, celebrate who they are, but provide the space for everyone else.
Excellent. So we've talked a bit about companies when they're hiring people that they like to hire people just like them. The individuals like to hire individuals, the social binders, the same. Why is that a problem?
Well, anytime you're in a situation where you're creating a homogeneous culture, we know, and all the big consulting companies now have proven this, that diverse teams always outperform homogeneous teams. So that's the obvious reason, but it also is a reason of fairness and equity and those types of issues.
So Bob, why do they perform better?
They perform better simply because, you don't see things from your point of view as robustly as somebody who comes to the same problem sees them naturally in a different way. So how do we take advantage of those differing worldviews to construct a new and healthier culture?
Yeah, culture and our interactions with others. It's a far stretch of seeing the other as a threat, seeing the other as an ally, or aiming towards the same goal, but pursuing different avenues. Very exciting. So
we can identify the differences in people, but hold on to those and then move beyond that, looking for allies who see the world the same way.
So what would you like to see happen in DEI if you could have the best of all worlds with the people with whom you work to get them to embrace, to make a major difference?
I think we're having the time for people in their workday to be able to, there's a statistic that I heard the other day that 48% of people are afraid to make friends at work. And it's kind of crazy when you think about it. They don't have time. They're afraid of others and afraid to do that. And some of the really enlightened companies are understanding that that is something that managers can take a hand in, and understand that we've got to end up having a group that is likely to work together across boundaries and make that a natural part of their work experience.
So understanding the why is really the key to
Yeah.
tell us the how, is it not?
It sure is. And it's so in our, I guess in our closing thoughts, one of the things I would say is that if we can add our instinctual profile to our demographics and our behavioral analysis, we think we can go beyond where most DEI companies or models live today, which is in the knowledge exchange business. And we're talking about adding skills and conversations, dialogue to the complexity of the challenge.
And when we add to that the respect and appreciation of the individual person,
Exactly.
and what role that plays, and have a person-centric, instinctual approach, then we really have sort of the cat's meow.
That's what they say.
Thank you, Bob. It's been a pleasure to work with you today.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Dennis and Bob. Today's keynote speaker is someone I'm excited to share with you. Natasha Bowman is one of the most well-known names in workplace expertise. As an acclaimed champion for workplace equity, she's been named a top 30 global guru in management, a top 200 voice in leadership, and LinkedIn top voice for mental health. She's a two-time author, a TEDx speaker, a Forbes contributor, and a media maven. Her latest vision is the Bowman Foundation for workplace equity and mental wellness. She hopes to create healthy work environments for everyone, regardless of the employer's ability to fund DEI initiatives. We are so pleased to have her as part of Mentera's advisory team as well. Natasha is authentic and honest about her experiences living at the intersection of DEI and mental health. And I know her story will inspire you as it has me. Introducing Natasha Bowman.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining. I am Natasha Bowman, JD SPHR, and I want to share a very personal story with you of some events that occurred over the past couple of years during the COVID pandemic. I must warn you, though, that there may be some talks of suicide that may be triggering for you during this journey. So I want to give you that warning that if you want to log off and log back on in the next 10 minutes, that you have that opportunity to do so. So picture this, it's February 2020, and I am on top of the world. I was a successful business owner. I had published my first book. I had conducted my first TED Talk, and I had been named a top 30 global guru in management. And I was headed to Indonesia to pick up that reward. I was so excited. I thought nothing could go wrong, or so I thought. You know, I had already gone through what I thought was some of the most horrific things that people could go through within their lives. At the age of 11, I was diagnosed, or I underwent open heart surgery due to congenital heart failure. I thought, oh my goodness, this is the end. In fact, my parents were told I had 6 months to live, but guess what? I lived to tell the story, and I haven't visited a cardiologist in over 30 years. I had my first child at the age of 21 as a single mom, but I was still determined to go to law school. And I went to law school as a single mother and brought my 5-year-old son along with me. And his first day of kindergarten was my first day of law school. If that wasn't challenging enough, I got married during law school, and the next thing you know, I was pregnant again with my second child and had her via C-section my first day of my last semester of law school. But guess what? I still persevered and graduated on time. But here's the thing, because medical insurance was too expensive, I wasn't covered, and this was before the Affordable Care Act. So I couldn't go back and get it after I was already pregnant. That was considered a pre-existing condition. So guess what? I had insurance and medical bills rather that was mounting up, and I had to file for bankruptcy right after my law school graduation. But that was okay. I made it through that too. Now, I faced various challenges throughout my life, but still I continued to conquer. And with each challenge, that just strengthens me. It strengthens my fight, my grit. And as I jumped over each hurdle, I was already ready for the next one, the higher one. I just wanted to go as high and further as I possibly could. I pushed myself as if I had no limits whatsoever. And my hunger for professional success became greater and more enriched as the years went by. Now, I knew that the color of my skin and my gender would pose a different challenges for me as I navigated first the corporate world, then navigated being a business owner, especially in New York City. And I knew that my credentials had to be better. I had to work harder, right, than anyone else. And at one time, I was working a full-time job, three part-time jobs, and was teaching at three different universities across three cities and two states. Writing my book out at the same time, right? I was doing all of this stuff. But here's the thing, when I slept, I felt guilty. My family would often hear me pecking at the keyboard of my laptop at 3 o'clock in the morning because I just couldn't get enough. But when I went down, I went down. My body would hurt and I couldn't get out of bed. I didn't want to talk to anyone. That drive for success suddenly vanished. But those days were few and far apart. I was able to just lift myself up out of it suddenly. Burnout is what I would call it, right? And then all of a sudden, I would just be back at it, checking off one goal after the next. But then March of 2020 came, and a virus that I thought was worlds away made itself to New York City, made itself to America, and shut America down. All the events I had scheduled, including that trip to Indonesia, were canceled. My clients canceled all of our projects together. I found myself sitting around the house without anything to do. My brain had not been trained to abstain from doing anything. Now, while the rest of the world was busy, having Zoom happy hours and, making TikToks and dancing to DJ D Nice and Club Quarantine, my brain was not having that. And it started going places that it never been before. You see, I had always been centered. My success, my self-worth had always been centered around professional success. And when that professional success was taken away, I didn't know who I was. And I felt as if I had no worth, no value to contribute to society. Right. And, I started to act differently, think differently. My speech started to speed up. My eyes started to glaze. And my husband noticed that something was different. And he told me, I think you need to get help. And although I didn't agree with him, I did. And I started to go to therapy for the very first time. As I'm going to therapy and starting to reconcile all of these things that were happening, another thing happened that brought America to a standstill. And that was the murder of a man named George Floyd. Watching that brutal murder of George Floyd prompted America and workplaces to have a racial reckoning, to realize and want to rectify the historic and systemic racism that were happening in our workplaces. And with that, my business picked up. I had more clients than I ever had. And more importantly, I was having conversations that I had been begging to have in organizations for years. I thought surely my brain would go back to normal. I would start just being my normal self any day now. But as the days went on, I found myself going deeper and deeper and deeper into a dark, dark hole. And in January of 2021, it all came crashing down. I decided on January 25th, 2021, I no longer wanted to live. Even though I had a wonderful husband, two beautiful kids, a thriving business, and to everyone on the outside, I seemed to be functioning very, very highly. Even that therapist I was talking to was like, you know what? I think you're okay. I think you're just like everyone else trying to reconcile all the events that were happening right here in America. But that night, I grabbed every bottle of peel that I could find in our household. I grabbed a bottle of champagne and I placed it in our guest bedroom. I went into my daughter's room and I placed a ring that I always wore in her sleeping hands and kissed her cheek. And then I went into that guest bedroom and I took every single one of those peels and washed it down with champagne and closed my eyes for what I thought would be the very last time. I woke up in a very, very blurry vision to the sight of people taking the strings out of my pajama pants, to taking the shoelaces out of my school shoes, and being escorted to a room with a mattress on the floor where I laid and slept for days while a stranger watched my every move because I was on suicide watch. And for the next several days, I was involuntarily admitted into an inpatient psychiatric facility. And it was while I was admitted there that I learned that I had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I learned that my ability to stay up for days at a time, to think I could conquer anything in the world, those were called manic episodes. And those days and nights where I just couldn't get out of bed, no matter how hard I tried, and my body hurt to I don't know what, that was manic depression. And, after I returned home and shared this with my family, I thought to myself at that moment, I'll never be able to share this with anyone else because if anyone else found out that I had been diagnosed with a mental illness, surely my life would never be the same. No one would ever see me as credible. No one would ever trust me again with their business and their companies and all these things that I had been trusted to do before. But as I sat there for the next several weeks that turned into months, hiding from society, going black on social media, a place that I was always so engaged in on a day-to-day basis, I researched bipolar disorder and mental illnesses and found out that 1 in 5 people suffered from a mental illness. 1 in 5. I thought about all the people that I had met in my life. I thought about the people in my family and how many people probably had, suffered from these crippling diseases, but yet felt the same way I did, that there is no way I would be able to share my disease. So like me, they sat there and suffered in silence. So what did I do? One day I said, I just thought back on my journey to how I'd gotten there before my diagnosis. And I thought about how I used my social media platform to be very vulnerable, to be very transparent about the things that were happening in my life, about my failures, my successes, every single thing. Why wouldn't I share this? Why wouldn't I be vulnerable in this moment? I had shared that I had open heart surgery at 11 years old. There was no shame, blame, or pain around that. Why should I have shame, blame, and pain around being diagnosed with a mental illness? So that November of 2021, I sat down with my family and I said, look, I have to talk about my diagnosis. I have to talk about my journey publicly. And they agreed. So one morning I woke up, I posted my professional photo, and I wrote the caption, "This is the face of bipolar disorder." And I shared my journey with my over 80,000 followers. Now, as you can imagine, I was super scared about what the response was going to be. So I just put my phone and laptop away, took a shower, got dressed, and I could hear my phone buzzing. I thought, oh my goodness, that's it. I'm getting nasty messages from trolls and everyone else. But when I finally decided to look down at my phone, I was amazed to see hundreds of messages and alerts, people supporting me, people cheering me, and people sharing their story. By the end of the week, just a few days later, I had over 25,000 reactions to my story and over 5 million views. And I thought, oh my goodness, if 25,000 people reacted to this and 10,000 people message me about their personal journey, imagine out of that 5 million, how many people read it but didn't feel comfortable sharing their story. But I decided at that moment to read every single message. And I read so many messages that shared the same story that I did about themselves or about their loved ones. And what I noticed on that common thing was that mental health affected everyone. It wasn't regulated to just certain races or genders or socioeconomic statuses or titles or demographic locations or demographics or geographic locations. There was a common thread throughout every single one of us here on this globe. Either we suffered from a mental health struggle or someone else. As I reflected on that, I reflected on my work in the DEI space, the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. And I had done so much work around race and gender and other disparities, even physical disabilities, but I had not done any work around mental health. I knew that toxic work environments impacted our ability to be able to succeed in the workplace. I knew that bias against other dimensions of diversity impacted our ability to succeed in the workplace. I knew that homogeneous workforces and leadership teams impacted our ability to succeed in the workplace. But what I didn't acknowledge is the importance of our mental health. I didn't realize that on top of being Black and on top of being a woman, that I had now a new dimension of diversity, something else to be discriminated against, something else to be seen different. And I thought about my different layers of diversity, and I thought about other people's layers of diversity who have this hidden layer that we're often silent about, but that we need support, we need advocacy in our workplaces because of it. And it was in that moment that I decided to turn my pain into purpose. And I decided to continue to be not just the face of bipolar disorder, but to be the voice, to be the face, to be anything I could be for those who suffered from mental health conditions, right? And so from then on, that has been my journey, is to cultivate cultures of mental wellness in the workplace. We've already done the same as a leader of HR. And as I dealt with DEI issues, oftentimes we related our physical health, right, with our ability to be well at work. And we made that correlation of being well at work with, again, being successful, meeting our goals. But a lot of times we just focus on the physical attribute. We only focus on gym membership discounts and step challenges and nutrition programs. But what we doing for mental illness? When we think about employee wellness, it's more about than what we can measure in an exam room. It's about an employee's wellness as a human being, right? Individually and corporately, right? So if I thought about that and that intersectionality of the work that I did in terms of DEI and in terms of mental wellness in the workplace, think about this. A strong abdominal core is useless if you're under psychological attack from a manipulative or domineering supervisor. Think about that. A trim waistline is more of a curse than a blessing when you're continuously being objectified and harassed with little to no accountability from the offenders. An excellent nutrition program is nothing more than a teasing insult when you pay disparity makes it difficult for you to be able to meet your basic human beings. We are not machines and we deserve better as humans, right? As people, as humanity in the workplace, right? When we think about our psychological safety, the ability to show up, speak up, and stand up for what's right, right? We've done that in terms of other dimensions of diversity of DEI, but we must do that for our mental health. We are a social human beings, right? We are relational and we need to be able to create safe spaces for dialogue about our mental health, about our struggles and the resources that we need, right? We are spiritual human beings, meaning however you understand it, there is more than life to life than what we can see under a microscope. And without the peace of God or the universe or whatever it is, you struggle to find meaning, purpose in holistic wellness, we have to have that. I am still on a journey on my mental health. And I'm doing that through a foundation that I created. I'm doing that through partnerships. And I'm doing that by being vulnerable and transparent about my mental illness because it is a part of my identity. And to be honest, I'm proud of it. I am proud that I can stand here and bring my whole authentic self to you and to workplaces. And I hope that bringing out the worst of me brings out the best of you. Thank you so much for coming today. And I look forward to engaging with you more about mental health in the workplace as it intersects with DEI. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha, again for your honesty and inspiring journey. Now, I want to bring our speakers back for a conversation with you. We'll be asking the questions you've submitted to do a deeper dive into what our speakers have shared. So I'd like to bring everyone back for an enriching conversation about the impact of DEI on mental health. Hi, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for coming back. We have an opportunity now to answer some of the questions that we've gotten through the course of the event, as well as some pre-submitted questions as well. But I want to start by acknowledging that yesterday was a national holiday for Juneteenth. Not all employers have kept up, but this is to Cornell and Natasha. What do you think is the impact of having Juneteenth as a workplace holiday?
I love how Natasha and I were both looking at each other like, you go, you go. I think the impact of it is visibility. It's allowing folks, and not just Black folks, right, but folks who are allies to the Black community to be able to see us and see a lived experience or a holiday that is centered around our history be celebrated and honored at such a high level. And so I think it's a part of the inclusivity that we keep talking about, that it's not just the negative things about our experiences that are being lights being shined on, but it's also about stories of triumph and overcoming and thriving that also are part of that as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And it's about equity when I think about it as well, because, a lot of our holidays that we traditionally celebrate, especially across the US, assumes that you've had one journey. It assumes that you practice the same religion, that you got freedom at the same time, et cetera, et cetera. So by recognizing that the different experiences of the dimensions of diversity across America brings equity to the workplace. We're celebrating different journeys. And as Cornell said, it's not about just for Black people. Just like Black people celebrate things that don't necessarily apply to their journey, it's the equitably in the holidays. And so it's a great thing that is finally being acknowledged, and so we can celebrate our differences in the workplace as well as what we have in common.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to continuing that visibility and getting to celebrate that. This is for Bob. You talked a lot about how to understand people's different perspectives. Why do you think it's important that we move from sort of a me to a we type of world?
Well, I think it's an incumbent on all of us to pursue the bridges between our differences and pursue a method of bringing us together in some sort of a common sense of interest in the future. So I just think it's part of our evolution in our DEI travel, because we start with identifying who we are. That gives us a perspective of who the others are, and we've got to find a place where we're all in it together. So I think it's as simple as that.
Yeah, I think that's really the goal of diversity, is not to isolate or highlight those differences, but find ways for us all to come together. We had a lot of really great questions from sort of mid-level managers, people who are stuck in between, maybe leadership that either wants to communicate these initiatives or maybe a little bit resistant to them. And I'm curious to hear people's perspective. This is for really anyone. How do we move? How do someone in that role really help create change in their workplace?
I'll go first if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I think it starts with, you don't have to wait for an initiative to do the right thing. When we think about mental wellness in the workplace, it has a lot to do with your relationship with the person that manages you. They're able to give you a lot of these things, a lot of that flexibility. They're able to address some of the microaggressions and micro other things that are happening in the workplace that may be impacting your mental health. You can always create a safe space for dialogue about your mental health. So I think, for too long, we've waited for initiatives and strategies to, address mental health and other DEI things in the workplace. But it really all starts with you. There are things that you can start doing today that will impact your employees and their sense of belonging and inclusion. And don't wait for a budget. Don't wait for initiatives. Just think about what are your ordinary actions that can influence extraordinary change for the people that work for you.
Yeah. That reminds me of something that Cornell talked about, which was how to really build that into your hiring practices, and maybe not waiting for that to come from the top, but really building that into how you're thinking about hiring.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too, and for frontline manager, how we even something as small as how we start meetings and how we engage and bring people together. One of the things that we do at Headspace Health is before every meeting, we go around and ask people, how are you really, right? It's not how you doing, because we love to lie about how we're really doing, right? We don't like telling people, but we go, no, how are you really? Tell me the honest truth. What's going on for you? And it's an invitation to say, I'm struggling. I'm tired. I didn't get that assignment done because I've been exhausted with other things. And so something as simple as that can help create the inclusivity. It helps create the space for people to be honest, to get the support that they need in order to not to survive, but to actually thrive at work and beyond.
Absolutely.
know-
So we definitely want to keep this conversation going beyond this, because we only have a limited time today. But before we end, I want to ask each of you, what do you think is the positive impact on people for being able to bring their authentic self to the workplace?
I really think being authentic is another word for empowering your personhood, and it can be noisy, and it can be, you know, sloppy and not neat, but it's really important to do that for yourself, and also important to demonstrate it for the others and give them permission to be themselves. And we think candidly that we don't distinguish, we try not to distinguish between our subcategories of ourselves. We like to talk about the whole person, and the whole person reacts at work. The whole person reacts in a social situation. The whole person is integrated, and if we move beyond looking at work as a subset of ourselves, I think that's part of the challenges to embrace your whole person. So,
You know, Natasha, I couldn't help but respond to what you were saying. I was at the top of my game before the pandemic, working with a great group of people out of Shanghai who, because of the embargoes, stopped working in the States, working with a group of Paris people, and I couldn't fly there and I couldn't interact with them. And I ended up making that year less money than I made raking leaves and shoveling snow when I was a kid. And it was a very, very kind of strange experience. But you've raised something, particularly with this mental issue, that I think as an older person, I really get more than I think sometimes we do as younger folks. When it comes to health, it's not about how many steps I take, or not about my tracker, and not about the nutrition. When I have an insult, an injury, a threat, an accident, I'm concerned about getting my life back, or as much of it as I can. And that focus has to be on getting your life back. And when you have a threat at work, or you have a toxic environment, you want to just get your life back. And people aren't always sure how to do it, but that becomes a critical driver. That's my contribution.
brilliant.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to all of you for joining us for the Impact of DEI and Mental Health. Mentera is a community that exists for you and because of you. So we encourage you to follow us on social media at Join Mentera, and get in contact with us at joinmentera.com, and all of our speakers as well. Tell us how you're focusing on mental health in your workplace, and what insights you need to help improve your mental health strategy organization-wide. We'll be having more engaging content and events throughout the year, and invite you to save the date for our first in-person event on May 16th of 2023 in Salt Lake City. So keep in touch and help us build a new era of mental health. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.